This week's pipe bomb attacks follow a media uproar over the gruesome murder of Jamal Khashoggi. And after weeks of shifting cover stories, Saudi Arabia's public prosecutor now says, yes, evidence suggests that the killing of the Washington Post contributor was premeditated. And President Trump's stance has evolved as well.
It was carried out poorly, and the cover-up was one of the worst in the history of cover-ups. It's very simple. Bad deal, should have never been thought of. Somebody really messed up, and they had the worst cover-up ever.
Joining us now is Fox News correspondent Jillian Turner. And Jillian, when the coverage of the Khashoggi murder was at its peak, some people, especially on the right, said the media were way overplaying this because it was a columnist, one of our own, maybe as a way to criticize the president. Now that CNN is a pipe bomb target, you're not hearing that as much, perhaps because the targets also included Obama, the Clintons, Biden, Eric Holder, and so forth.
Well, I think that what the media was reacting to was the fact that the president did not come straight out and condemn the Saudis, the royal family. The media is very prickly about this. And it's not just when it comes to Saudi Arabia. It's not just when it comes to President Trump. When they feel he's hedging and he's not forceful enough in condemning America's enemies, they get mad. And that's, we saw that with Kim Jong-un, with Vladimir Putin, now with the Crown Prince.
Well, weren't the media entitled to be prickly because the Saudis were telling a ludicrous story? I mean, last week on this program, we had Brett Barzani, the Saudi foreign minister, who was still peddling the fistfight story. It was just a fistfight that erupted inside the consulate in Turkey. Now we have the president coming around. Initially, he seemed inclined to sort of defer to the Saudi explanations. And now he says worst cover-up ever. So were the media right to keep pushing on this?
I think so, because, the president came out on the right side eventually, once I guess he was waiting for whatever his own reasons were. It was very well said. It was the worst cover-up job in the history of maybe all time. It was obvious to everybody what happened.
I mean, initially they said he walked out alive.
Right.
Then it was a fistfight, and then finally now premeditated, which was obvious all along.
And it was, as a member of the media, as a member of the American public, what the Saudis were peddling here was offensive for the first 2 weeks.
Right. Now the Crown Prince says, oh, this was a heinous crime and so forth. How do reporters cover a regime that, in this case at least, blatantly lied again and again? It is now evident. This is not an opinion. It's fact. It is fact.
I will say, though, that it's also something that foreign governments do. They lie to the United States. It's not something new.
What distinguished it maybe that this was such a high-profile case, or that the media made it such a high-profile case with Khashoggi?
And the media doesn't have to make the same considerations that the government does, right? I mean, they have a different role. They don't necessarily have to worry about American national security interests the way that President Trump does.
Or balancing act with trade and military sales with the Saudis.
Exactly.
Right. They can just sort of be morally outraged, especially if a journalist happens to be involved. Now, we're seeing some of the same finger-pointing going on with yesterday's mass shooting at the synagogue in Pittsburgh. I mentioned earlier some headlines suggesting President Trump, with his tone, is perhaps to blame. And it brings this up, which is, what's your reaction as a reporter when people said, nobody cared about this Khashoggi killing except for journalists? And how come you journalists didn't care about the deaths in Benghazi, which I take exception to?
I do, too. I got a lot of comments when I was reporting on the Khashoggi murder from folks on social media saying exactly that, saying, how can you care about one person from Saudi Arabia when we have a caravan careening towards the U.S. border, when we have people, Americans murdered in Benghazi? It's a spurious line of reasoning to me.
I mean, everybody cared about the fact that 4 American lives were lost at Benghazi. It then became a 2-year investigation with a lot of political overtones, and that's where opinions diverged. So
that was part of the, I don't know where that line of thinking originated. I don't know if it was a government sort of line that was being pushed, or whether people came up with that on their own. That this is just one person. They're not an American.
He was a bad guy anyway.
He was a bad guy. Ties to Hezbollah. All of that. I don't know where that came from, but it was completely ineffective.
I think the one thing we can conclude is that in the current climate, even murder, even violence can and is being politicized, and that's sad to me, at least. Jillian Turner, great to see you.